Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. How's everybody doing? It's Friday. That means it's their Fantasy Football Friday fix here, where, you know, me, your boy, your man, your guy with a plan. Here is, we're going to go over some fantasy football conversations, some topics of discussion. We're going to go over some games that are coming up. That might be some big matchups. Of course, we got to go over what's going on with all these COVID-19 protocols and things like this. Not only that, but we also have just some overall thoughts of what the season's been overall, just who's been like some big time MVPs for fantasy, who's come back, who's done like, who are their biggest winners and losers as far as the fantasy season goes along. So gonna do that and then some more. GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Here we go. So I wanted to start off by talking about just what goes on for my leagues, because I think it's just fun to update and see where I'm going. So that way everybody knows where I stand, because I've been doing it for this long. I might as well keep the train going along. So for ESPN specifically, we have lost. We're in a 1-loss streak versus another guy who was a 1-loss streak. Both 5-3. This is a in-division, basically rivalry in a sense. This guy, I've played with him for a few years now, but we're both tied for first in the division along with somebody else. And we have a big-time matchup ahead, and he is projected to be a big-time scorer across the board. So it's not going to be a lot of fun. For me, I am projected to be a 32-point underdog. So I am plus 32 to win. So that's not great. His projections are 140, but I don't think that he's going to reach that projection. But we've seen things change before. It's not looking good. So he has Deshaun Watson. He has David Johnson. He has James Conner, who I drafted and traded to him not too long, like a while in the probably week 3 or so. He has Devontae Adams. He has Tyreek Hill. He has Darren Waller, Justin Jackson, the Chargers defense, and Will Lutz, my guy. Love that guy. And for me, I have Tua Tagovailoa via a trade I made at some point Tuesday after the pod. I made that trade. Alvin Kamara, of course. I still have Ronald Jones. I have Michael Thomas. Fingers crossed that he does end up playing this week, as he has yet to be ruled out yet. And it just seems to be good news. I think that he is projected to play, so that's a good sign. I picked up Darryl Mooney from Chicago, who has a matchup against Tennessee, who, even though they did just pick up a big time trade asset from the Chargers at the cornerback, you know, Desmond King, he's a great player, but there's only one guy, and the rest of their cornerbacks have not been the greatest, so we'll see what happens. But I think Mooney will find himself in a really good situation with Chicago no matter what. I still have Trey Burton starting, which is probably going to be my Achilles heel. It's probably going to hurt me, because if he doesn't score, just like every other tight end, it's just not a good look. So that may end up changing at a certain point in time later on. I have Le'Veon Bell via a trade I made and starting, because I believe Carolina gives up a lot of points to running backs, and I feel like he might end, if he gets in the goal line, he gets in the end zone, it might be a really good day for him. Kansas City's defense is still going strong for me, and I have Joey Sly for Carolina as a kicker. So Matthew Stafford was dropped in my league. I picked him up. As you can see, my quarterback situation has changed. I did trade for one. I traded, who was it? I almost said Mostert, but no, I traded the Mr. Running Back extraordinaire from the 49ers, Hasty, who would be playing tonight. But I traded Jermichael Hasty for Tua Tagovailoa, basically straight up. And I figured that there's just too many rotating backs in that offense. And, of course, they're going to have some sort of value for the time being. And I need somebody that I can lock down at quarterback that I have some optimism for. I've seen enough of the Baker Mayfield. Daniel Jones, I should have started him. I would have won last week. But at this point, here's where we are. And that's just what is going to happen. So I ended up getting Keenan Cole along with the trade that I got in Le'Veon Bell, and that it's just for depth purposes. I still have Chenault on my team as well, and I have Preston Williams. I wanted to start Preston, but I feel like I have to see it before it happens. AJ Green is on bye. I still have some sort of faith, and yeah, that's where my team is at as far as the standings across the league. Like I said, I'm in a 4-way tie for first now, as someone else is also 5-3 in my division, and everybody else is 4-4, and there's 3 and 5 teams across both divisions, but in my division is only one, and he is the 7th in that division. And in the West division, because we're in the East, it is 3 and 5 team. And then it's 4-4, 4-4, 4-4, and the last 4-4 guy has lost 4 straight. He was the top of the league, but his team has basically crumbled underneath him. And he was a guy who had his draft was weird to begin with, and he got some really interesting wins back to back to back that have now basically concaved on itself, and his team is what we projected it to be, which was not good. 2, 3, and 5 teams right after that, and then we have ourselves a 2 and 6 right then in there. So that's the ESPN league in a nutshell. As far as my playoff bracket standings, we are currently 4th, and I'll be facing the guy who's directly under me in my division. So everything is tight. I can't afford to drop too many spots, because the goal is just to make it to the playoffs. I don't care about seeding. We don't get bye weeks. So it doesn't matter. It's just about getting to the proper seedings and all of that. Moving to the Yahoo Fantasy League, where I've won 2 straight now. So I'm 4-4, and currently I'm 7th out of 10. So because of probably who I've lost to, they get the upper hand over me. But just to keep this in mind, the top 3 are tied for 5 and 3, and literally it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 way 4-4 tie for 4th place in the league. It's a 10-man league, so it's not too many going on. And then there's 1, 3, and 5 team who I believe is, I might have played them last week, but there's also a 2 and 6 team who I do play this coming week. And I'm sorry, I played the 3 and 5 team this week. I played the other team last week, where he has Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, Michael Thomas, Todd Gurley, DeAndre Swift, Gronk, Justin Jackson, Carlson as his kicker from Las Vegas, and the Pittsburgh defense. So his team is no slouch, just like most teams in this league are no slouch. I have Russell Wilson, of course, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson is starting. Hopefully he has a bounce-back game. We have Josh Jacobs against the Chargers defense. That'd be interesting. I have Leonard Fournette starting against New Orleans. I have Jared Cook starting against Tampa Bay. I have David Montgomery in there in my flex. Mr. Myers for Seattle, and I have Buffalo's defense. Mari Cooper probably won't start for me ever again. Michael Gallup probably won't be starting him either. Miles Sanders is out, of course, and it doesn't even matter just because he is on bye this week anyway. So looking at that, that's where everything is at for that league. And I don't really know about the projections as far as where we would be placed in playoff scenario as of yet, but it's definitely going to be a real tough go. That's for sure. It's going to be a tough go in that league because there's no real upside going on there. And everything is just a tough win over tough win. And everybody has basically like a 50% chance of winning each week. And that's the hardest thing for me to come to grasp with. Everything is super difficult in non-PPR leagues just because it's so touchdown dependent. And it's one of the things that I don't really enjoy about it. It's so touchdown dependent. But at the same time, it's you play in what you pay for. And that's what I paid to play in. And, I do technically enjoy what's going on there. So it's all good. So we're going to move on now, of course, and go ahead and talk about some injuries going ahead of week 9. So let's get right into that. So first, of course, we have a 49ers versus the Green Bay Packers game going on. And, injuries are something that happens in the NFL all the time. And they're already wrecked several teams entirely this season. So Dallas Cowboys, which were healthy entering, we got to figure out which teams are healthy entering the week 9. So here we go. Packers at 49ers. So the Packers, Kevin King with a quadrep. I think that's it. Will Redmond, their safety, with a shoulder. Vernon Scott with a shoulder are out. Aaron Jones, with a calf. David Bakhtiari. I always mispronounce his name, so I apologize. But the offensive tackle, he has a chest. And Rick Wagner with a knee, and their safety Raven Green are all questionable. 49ers, it's injury of the team. Jimmy Garoppolo, Tevin Coleman, Deebo Samuel, Demetrius Flanagan Fowles, Brandon Ayuk, and Trent Williams are all out for the 49ers. So Packers coach Matt LaFleur may be forced to get extra creative in the run backfield, where Aaron Jones appears to be a legit game time decision, where both Jamal Williams and A.J. Dillon will be unavailable due to COVID-19 reserves. Dexter Williams and Tyler Irvin are expected to carry the load there. Late on Wednesday night, it was reported that the 49ers would be without Brandon Ayuk, Samuel, and Williams since they were identified as close contacts after wide receiver Kendrick Bourne tested positive for coronavirus, completely unupted by injuries. San Francisco is expected to turn to number 2 Nick Mullins at quarterback, though third stringer CJ Beathard could also be in line for action. JaMychal Hasty and Jerick McKinnon will continue to shoulder running back duties with Coleman out and Raheem Mostert on IR. Tight end Jordan Reed, fresh off IR himself, may fill in for George Kittle, though Reed has been limited in practice thus far. And for Wednesday's practice reports, the Giants at Washington, who is a -3 favorite to win. Devonta Freeman and defensive back Ryan Lewis did not practice on Wednesday, but the main focus was on wide receiver Golden Tate. Giants head coach Joe Judge told reporters that Tate was not with the team for their walkthrough, but will be back on Thursday. Linebacker Devontae Downs, linebacker Blake Martinez, cornerback Logan Ryan, and wide receiver Sterling Shepard were all limited participants, and the Giants claimed former second-round pick Dante Pettis off waivers, but we don't expect to see him on the field in Week 9. Wide receiver Isaiah Wright was limited in practice for Washington, and tight end Logan Thomas, offensive tackle Jerron Christian, and defensive end James Smith-Williams, and fellow defensive end Montez Sweat were also limited participants in practice. For Seattle, who was -5 at the Bills, minus 2.5 favorites. The Seahawks have issues with running back as Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde, and Travis Homer all sat out practice on Wednesday, joining them in missing practice with tight end Greg Olsen, guard Mike Lupati. He has a back injury. Defensive end Benson Mayowa, cornerback Shaquille Griffin, safety Ogu Amandi, and cornerback DJ Reed are all limited in practice as well. Good news is that Jamal Adams was back on practice field as a limited participant as he continues to work through the groin injury. Buffalo is still missing several prominent starters with John Brown, Matt Milano, Josh Norman, all sitting out on Wednesday. Offensive tackle Cody Ford, meanwhile, returned to the field in limited fashion. For the Ravens, who are -2.5 at the Colts, is running back Mark Ingram ankle, who's not able to participate, while wide receiver Chris Moore was limited with a thigh injury. And we'll continue on this topic after we take this very much needed break. GSMC, we'll be right back. Do you ever feel like you're always on? You know, like how you always have to hit the reset button to get going and what's going next, and you just go. It's just too much going on. And when I feel like that, I have to go grab the beer that no one else has. It literally is made to chill, and that's Coors Light. Coors Light wants you to know that no matter what sport is on this fall, Saturdays are your time to chill. Even if your sports team isn't playing this year, there's still plenty of teams and sports to watch on TV that can give you an excuse to chill out and drink a beer. So, watching football is therapeutic to fans. It is uninterrupted me time, an excuse to chill. Drink that nice Coors Light. It's the official beer for watching any sport or team just to drink beer. Got to tell you, man, Coors Light is a wonderful product. I enjoy drinking it all the time. Sundays is Coors Light time. And Coors Light is the only one I choose when I need to unwind. So when you want to reset, reach for the beer that is made to chill. Get Coors Light in the new look delivered straight to your door at get.coorslight.com. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast listeners, we are going to continue on where we left off, talking about injuries, and we left off at the Ravens, -2.5 at the Colts. Running back Jonathan Taylor suited up on Wednesday's Colts practice, although his counterpart, Jordan Wilkins, may have earned more snaps thanks to the Week 8 breakout. Wide receiver T.Y. Hilton, who has struggled mightily as of late, did not practice and appears unlikely to play at Baltimore. The Panthers at the Chiefs, who the Chiefs are a -10.5 favorite. Good news is that star running back Christian McCaffrey returned to practice field on Wednesday, and it appears that he will return to action against the Chiefs. Rookie safety Jeremy Chin was the only player not in a Panthers practice on Wednesday as he's nursing a knee injury. Offensive tackle Russell Okung was limited, and starting quarterback Teddy Bridgewater was listed on the injury report with a neck injury after taking a hard hit last week, but he was a full participant, which is a good sign, to say the least. The only two players that missed practice for the Chiefs were offensive tackle Mitchell Schwartz, who was dealing with a back injury, and defensive end Frank Clark with a knee injury. Wide receiver Sammy Watkins was limited with a hamstring issue. Bears at the Titans, where the Titans are a -5.5 favorite. The Bears were down several starters at practice on Wednesday, including wide receiver Anthony Miller, safety Eddie Jackson, and tight end Jimmy Graham. The Titans' Wednesday injury report was even worse than Chicago's pass rusher Jadeveon Clowney, Adam Humphries, and Dennis Kelly, the offensive tackle, punter Brent Kern, and defensive lineman Jeffrey Simmons all mispracticed on Wednesday. And for the Lions at the Vikings, who is a -4, interestingly enough, Vikings are -4 in this game because of Matthew Stafford with the COVID stuff. Wide receiver Kenny Golladay and offensive tackle Taylor Decker missed practice on Wednesday, but the main development, of course, has to deal with Matthew Stafford, who was placed on reserve/COVID-19 list. According to ESPN's Adam Schefter, Stafford is considered a high-risk close contact from a non-team member. The last contact came on Monday, which means it's possible Stafford could come off injury reserve list for Sunday and play against the Vikings. And even if that does happen, he will not be able to practice all week. And despite leaving Week 8, cornerback Cameron Datzler has a real chance to return against Detroit. Coach Mike Zimmer said he missed practice on Wednesday, along with cornerbacks Mark Fields and Holden Hill. And for Texans, who are -7 at the Jaguars, the Texans are relatively healthy, as Randall Cobb, who had an illness, and linebacker Kyle Emanuel were the only two players who were not able to practice on Wednesday. The Jaguars will be without starting quarterback Gardner Minshew this week due to a right thumb injury. He missed practice on Wednesday along with running back Devine Ozugbo with a hamstring. So the Falcons are -3.5 the Broncos are at the Falcons, who the Falcons are -3.5. AJ Bouye, Brian Canahan, Philip Lindsay, and wide receiver Deontay Spencer sat out on practice on Wednesday. Calvin Ridley did not practice Wednesday for the Falcons, potentially boosting Russell Gage's value in Week 9. And Takk McKinley also missed practice with a groin injury. The Raiders at the Chargers, who are -1, the Chargers, to win the game. Or should I say favorite. Safety Jonathan Abram and offensive tackle Trent Brown missed practice on Wednesday due to illness, while offensive tackle Colton Miller sat out with an ankle injury. Rookie wideout Brian Edwards was limited to participant with a foot and ankle injuries. Pass rusher Joey Bosa missed practice on Wednesday due to a concussion, and offensive guard Trey Turner was a limited participant due to a groin issue. And for the Steelers, safety Jordan Dangerfield, offensive lineman Stefan Winoski had a pectoral issue, and defensive end Tyson Alualu, there we go, Tyson Alualu were the only Steelers that missed practice on the Wednesday report. So moving on to the Cowboys. The Cowboys' biggest issue is at quarterback, and whether Cooper Rush or Garrett Gilbert is set to start in place of Ben DiNucci, who is in turn replacing Andy Dalton. The initial fill-in for Dak Prescott, already decimated by injuries. Dallas will also be without punter Chris Jones, who is undergoing surgery and is set to be replaced against Pittsburgh by newly signed Hunter Nieswander. And on Wednesday, running back Ezekiel Elliott and defensive end Alden Smith were limited participants. So the Dolphins at the Cardinals, despite the potential chance that to take over Miami's running back with Myles Gaskins, MCL, sidelined for several weeks. Backup Matt Breida was a no-show on Wednesday's practice, leaving Jordan Howard and Patrick Liard as the likely running backs in Arizona. Arizona running back Kenyon Drake is progressing quicker than expected, but remains day-to-day, per coach Cliff Kingsbury, and could be a game-time decision against Miami, leaving Chase Edmonds as the potential lead ball carrier. And finally, the Saints at the Buccaneers, where the Buccaneers are -5. Drew Brees popped up on the injury report with a right shoulder injury and was limited participant in practice. Michael Thomas was also, who has not played since Week 1 because of multiple injuries and a suspension, figures to remain questionable for the Bucs game, with Emmanuel Sanders set to return from the COVID list. Defensive tackle Sheldon Rankin sat out of practice due with a knee injury. Cornerback Jamel Dean, offensive guard Ali Marpet, and lineman William Golston were the only Buccaneers who missed practice on Wednesday, and wide receiver Chris Godwin was limited with a finger injury. So that's your injury report. A lot of people, a lot of things happening in the NFL as far as injuries. So it's always good to stay up to date on that thus far, because information is always key. I don't know if anybody else saw over the past few days that Pat McKinley has kind of been calling out the Falcons over the past few days on Twitter, saying that they have had multiple offers that they just did not accept. And, most guys don't go too vocal about that sort of stuff, but he has decided that he really wants out of Atlanta, and it doesn't seem like Atlanta is ready to ship him off just yet. Of course, the trade deadline already ended, so if anything were to happen, it would have to be off-season wise, or they'd have to cut him, which I don't know what that would do for Pat McKinley, but that is just something to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and talk about, we're at halfway point. Let's talk about some guys that we hit and guys that we did not hit on. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep doing the victory lap, as I got to keep reminding people. When I talked about it back in April, maybe even March, about DK Metcalf, who he had to tweet himself. It is not DJ Metcalf, people. It is not DJ Metcalf. It is, in fact, DK Metcalf. Remind yourselves that is the case. But DK Metcalf is having a season for his own right. He's been excellent. The Seattle Seahawks offense, for the most part, has been excellent in the wide receiver game, where him and Tyler Lockett are both on pace to have tremendous 1,000-yard seasons. And Russell Wilson is on an MVP level tear. Of course, not to say that he hasn't had it before, but it's definitely more prominent right now, as their defense still struggles to defend, to say the least. And that's done nothing but help, that offense really come together and just continue to bring on, points in bunches and just haymaker after haymaker after haymaker to other fantasy teams' demise. So DK has been really good. Of course, Tyler Lockett has been really good. And I got to say, just off the top of my head, who has been kind of a disappointment, to, I guess, say the least, is, in fact, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Just because where he's been drafted, where he was projected, what people thought he was going to become, unfortunately, that just hasn't been the case for him. He gets the touches, he gets volume. Now he's in a running back by committee system, which many people thought would have happened anyway, but with Le'Veon Bell. So depending on who gets those goal line looks, it's going to look a little bit different for him going forward as well. So, a guy who you drafted in the top 10 for his upside potential, what we've seen what the Chiefs are able to do running the ball, it just hasn't been all the way there for Clyde Edwards yet. He looks good. Don't get me wrong. He's a good player. He looks nice. For fantasy purposes, it just hasn't been what we thought it would end up being for him in that offense. And this is one of the dangers about, having Chiefs players that aren't, Travis Kelce or even Tyreek Hill, and especially Patrick Mahomes, is that everybody else kind of has to get it while they live, or get it how they live is the saying. So that's something that for sure you have to always be willing to monitor and understand, is that there's just so many options on the Chiefs. It all ends with Patrick Mahomes, what he's able to do. But looking forward, I think next year a lot of people are going to look forward and say, unless something drastically changes within their team structure, that Travis Kelce is going to be the only guy on the Chiefs that you can say 100% without a doubt he is worth the buying price. Because I think Tyreek Hill has dropped a bit as far as buying price, even though he's had a couple good games back here. He's still very much boom or bust, in my opinion, and he hasn't really been utilized as much as or should I say the new utilization of him hasn't really pushed him to a new category of receiver for me. And until that ends up happening, I'll always assume that he's a boom or bust player. And it's just that he's been more boom than bust just because of the Chiefs' offense, the way it's designed. So you can argue and say that, well, Tyreek Hill, if he's more boom than bust, why not just draft him at his position every time? He's like the second wide receiver gone. But as you can see, a lot of people are at wide receiver surplus. Like, you can find 15 points from a wide receiver any given Sunday on the waiver wire. And, yeah, you're not going to get, Tyreek Hill gives you the upside of giving you 20-plus points every week. So that's why you draft him there. And the same thing for Michael Thomas. But as you can see, you want guys who particularly get the volume over everything else. So you're looking at the DeAndre Hopkins, who honestly fell a little bit low in the draft just because he was going to a new team. We didn't know how he was going to be utilized. And now what we see is that, DeAndre is a top 2 receiver in the league, fantasy-wise, and probably in the real NFL. We see Devontae Adams really cementing himself as the fantasy wide receiver GOAT right now. If you have Devontae Adams, you are clearly living your best life. And, people are still waiting, including myself, probably just projecting right here. We're still waiting to see if Michael Thomas can, come back and do what he did last year, or at least some semblance of what he did last year, and see if he just starts eating up volume. Because I have to assume, when someone like Marquez Callaway comes in and kind of basically replaces the Michael Thomas sort of routes and style, and he got a lot of volume that week when he did that, I would have to hope that Michael Thomas is going to be doing similar things to what he needed to do. Now, granted, let's keep in mind, Michael Thomas, when he played against Tampa Bay the first week, it didn't look all the way right. He didn't get that many catches or many looks at all, and it was just a bad play. But it was week 1. It was weird things going on. It seems to me that the Saints are back on track as far as their offensive efficiency and doing things of that nature. And real quick, another disappointment off the top of my head has to be Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs was drafted basically in the top 10 in most leagues, and he's barely top 25 right now. It's just not fun. Because Josh Jacobs, he gets he's basically like a traditional running back. If you have him in standard leagues, you're not even hurting that much just because he doesn't catch the ball. But he just has not scored touchdowns. He'll get you down there. But, Derek Carr is throwing the ball a lot. He's getting the ball to different receivers. And, having that bell cow who doesn't score is really hurtful. So that's why he has kind of been a disappointment thus far in the halfway point of the season. Let's go ahead and take another break, and then we come back. We'll continue on the fantasy football conversations as we're going to get into some matchup mania, GSMC.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We're back, and we're talking about fantasy football matchups. It's Matchup Mania, people. Let's get it. So, Pro Football Focus has an interesting article that we're going to take a look at and deep dive into some wide receiver, cornerback matchups that has been really strong, and that's the thing that they've been focusing on all season long. So, figuring out who could be facing shadow coverage as well as the best and worst overall situations. And they also talk about tight end groups. So Here are the snap ratio data, or the snap rate data by alignment, target share, air yard, market share, yards per route run, and all of those certain things. So here's Green Bay Packers at the San Francisco 49ers. So we have Devontae Adams, MVS, who is Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Darius Shepard is the slot, I suppose, because he would not be the left or right out wide. And then you have Jason Verrett, Emmanuel Mosley, and Kawan Williams, who would be covering them alongside. So, one of the most underrated stories of the 2020 season is Verrett. One, he's playing extended action for the first time since 2015, and two, returning to something close to his previous high-end form. And still, Adams is on pace for 162 targets despite missing 2 games. And, his mind meld chemistry with Aaron Rodgers is maybe matched only by Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett. Don't expect the Packers' undisputed number 1 pass game option status as fantasy football's number 1 wide receiver to go anywhere in 2020. So pencil him in already. The Packers weren't quite able to acquire Will Fuller, and that means Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Alan Lazard, who is on IR, remain the passing game's best complementary options. And then Equanimeous St. Brown had a pair of plausible drops in Week 8 and split snaps with Darius Shepard and Malik Taylor. So ultimately, it's impossible to expect consistent production from anyone involved in that passing game other than Devontae Adams. At best, we can call Valdez-Scantling a boom or bust wide receiver 4, as he boasts a league-high 18.3 yard average depth of target depth. But the third-year field-stretching talent hasn't reached 50 receiving yards in a game since Week 2. So as far as the tight end breakdown for that, Robert Tonyan could have been a much bigger day, or could have had a much bigger day in Week 8 with a bit more accuracy from Aaron Rodgers, but still, his 5 for 79 line on 7 targets was plenty solid, and the Packers tight end 1 is the overall PPR tight end 4 through 8 weeks. The Packers do rotate their tight end room to some extent, but Tanyan's 61% snaps in Week 8 works pretty well ahead of Jay Sternberger and Mercedes Lewis. A matchup against the league's third best defense and fewest PPR points per game to that position is hardly ideal, although Tanyan continues to warrant top 10 fantasy treatment thanks to his potential to function as Aaron Rodgers' number 2 pass game option in this banged-up offense. So for the 49ers, which is, River Craft, Richie James, and Trent Taylor. So Jair Alexander, Josh Jackson, and Chandon Sullivan would be the cornerback matchup. So Jimmy Garoppolo, of course, is going to be sidelined, expecting to be a minimum of 6 weeks. George Kittle is out. Raheem Mostert is out. Deebo Samuel is out. Kendrick Bourne is out with COVID. And so is Brandon Ayuk, technically. And suddenly the 49ers offense is down to their last few options in terms of viable playmakers. And it took a long time to figure out who the heck 49ers might be lining up at wide receiver this week. Taylor seems to be the best candidate to gobble up targets out of the slot. And people want nothing to do with Kraft or James or even Kevin White, who is on their roster, strange enough. In their respective quest to get to the Packers' pair of talented corners, Alexander in particular has truly been playing better than just about any corner in the league through 8 weeks. The sinking offense against the league's 6th best defense and fewest PPR points per game allowed to wide receivers outside of daily fantasy, shutdown slates try to avoid exposure to this in particular group. And Kyle Shanahan is hopeful that Jordan Reed will be back this week, and he looked healthy in the early going this season, ripping off 7 of 50 for 2 when he featured against the Jets back in Week 2. Limited snaps are a concern in Reed's first game back from injury, but it's comfortable treating him as a borderline PPR tight end 1 if active. And who else is Mullins going to throw to? And Ross Dwelley could also be a tight end 1 borderline if Reed remains sidelined. Again, the wide receiver room is widely depleted at this point, and Just realized the passing game isn't set up even remotely well. The Packers are just one of 7 defenses that has allowed fewer than double-digit PPR points per game to tight end position this season. Moving on to Houston at Jacksonville. So you have a Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, Randall Cobb against Sidney Jones, C.J. Henderson, and Trey Herndon. So Deshaun Watson has cleared 300 passing yards and racked up multiple scores through the air in 4 consecutive games. He usually is responsible for a majority of the offense's production when the Texans happen to win. And we've seen the franchise quarterback continuously drive the offense up and down the field throughout garbage time when the poorest Houston team falls behind in the scoreboard. So it's a good thing that the Texans didn't trade Watson's number 1 wideout. He's been a completely different quarterback with Will Fuller sidelined over the years. So per game with Fuller in 29 games, 25.8 fantasy points, 2.2 touchdowns, 282 passing yards with an 8.79 yards per attempt. And without Fuller in 16 games was just 22, 1.3 touchdowns, 1 passing, 227 passing yards and 7.26 yards per attempt. Fuller ran a 4.32 40-yard dash at the combine back in the day and has routinely found ways to get open downfield throughout his career. 43 players have at least 50 deep ball targets since Fuller entered the league. His 22% rate of being open or wide open on these past game situations or opportunities is tied for 10th with Tyreek Hill. Continue to treat Fuller as an upside wide receiver 2 that he's had been all season except for week 2. Brandon Cooks has earned weekly upside wide receiver 3 treatment with 161 and 1 touchdown, 9 receptions, 68 and 1, and 7 receptions for 60 receiving lines since week 5. The goose egg he had, Randall Cobb, like any receiving associated with Watson, isn't the worst option for fantasy owners dealing with plenty of bye weeks to turn to. Just realize he's the clear-cut number 3 wideout in that offense. Plus, the Jaguars rank among the league's bottom 5 defenses in explosive play rate, yards per attempt, and passer rating. So the expected return of Jordan Atkins renders both him and Darren Fells a lower ceiling. Touchdown-dependent tight end 2 options, and they are a similar situation to Minnesota. Both tight ends are talented enough to put a sporadic production, but the usage is usually so split that you can't really expect any sort of consistency from either one of the players. And we're moving on to the Jaguars offense now. So the Jaguars offense, DJ Shark, Laviska Shenault, and Keenan Cole as the slot wide receiver, and Bradley Roby, Vernon Hargreaves, and Eric Murray as the cornerback. So Gardner Minshew is sidelined / benched. Mike Glennon apparently is the 3rd-string quarterback in Jacksonville. Enter Jake Luton, who the Jaguars selected in the 6th round in 2020 NFL draft. The former Oregon State signal caller ranks among college quarterbacks with at least 100 dropbacks in 2019 or below. So he was number 21 in passing grade. He was tied for 107 yards per attempt. Adjusted completion percentage rate was number 47. Passing rating was number 31. Average depth of target was tied for 161. And the advanced metrics seem to paint a picture of a typical game manager with limited fantasy football upside in terms of rushing ability and willingness to throw downfield. And perhaps Luton does do a good job of taking care of the football and gives the Jaguars the best chance to win at the moment. But you have no idea what he offers from a fantasy perspective. Playing behind Pro Football Focus's number 20 graded offensive line hardly seems ideal. The matchup isn't anything to fear. It's just hesitant to expecting anything from this unproven rookie in his first career action. And Shark is ranked as the PPR wide receiver 28, which feels a bit optimistic. Luton's check-down heavy style could result in a larger role for Shenault. Ultimately, nobody knows, so try to avoid playing anyone in the offense other than James Robinson until at least week 10. And basically, that's the tight end breakdown as well. Avoid. Giants at Washington. So Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard, and Golden Tate are your 1, 2, and 3. And Kendall Fuller, Ronald Darby, and Jimmy Moreland are your cornerbacks in these scenarios. So Only 4 players have racked up at least 40% of their team's air yards this season, and that is Terry McLaurin, Darius Slayton, Adam Thielen, and DJ Moore. The Giants' talented second-year wide receivers should had a far bigger Monday night against the Buccaneers, but Daniel Jones either overthrew him or looked elsewhere. We shouldn't necessarily expect much of a bounce-back performance, considering the Giants have allowed a league-worst mark in both total pressures and pressure rate, and they're facing the football team's ferocious defensive front. Bigger weeks are ahead for Slayton, but don't underestimate the potential for Chase Young and company to render their passing game mute. You have to go back all the way to week 11 of 2018 to find the last time Sterling Shepard played a full game and received fewer than 6 targets. His lower depth of target role doesn't yield as many fantasy-friendly opportunities as Slayton, but the veteran is clearly ahead of Golden Tate in Jones' pecking order. The potential for Jones to spend most of the Sunday afternoon on his back makes it tough to expect much from anybody involved in the offense, although both Slayton and Shepard are worthy of being in the wide receiver 3 conversation. Golden Tate has scored in consecutive weeks, but he hasn't had more than 3 targets in games since week 5, so probably is a pass on him. Evan Ingram actually caught a pass further than 10 yards downfield last week and continues to strangely get a rush attempt or 2 per week. The talented 4-year tight end still hasn't found the end zone, but his 19 targets over the past 2 weeks are tough to ignore, and the floor is low for literally everybody in this offense. And yes, Ingram remains as a tight end 1 borderline thanks to his 20% target share, the 4th highest mark at the position. As far as Washington's wide receivers are concerned, Terry McLaurin, Cam Sims, and Dontrell Inman are the left, right, and slot, while James Bradbury, Isaac Yondom, and Darnay Holmes are the cornerbacks in question. So McLaurin posted a season-worst 2 receptions for 8-yard line against Bradbury and the Panthers in 2019, although the ex-Carolina quarterback stuck to the left side of the field for that matchup and didn't actively travel with the football team's number 1 wideout. We also didn't see them square off regularly in week 6, but this could change as McLaurin caught 7 of 12 targets for 74 yards in that matchup. Make no mistake about it, this is a tough spot for the artist known as F1. If the Giants ask their number 1 cornerback to follow him all around the field, no receiver has truly gotten the best of Bradbury in 2020, as in Allen Robinson, Kendrick Bourne, Amari Cooper, Deshaun Jackson, and Mike Evans all kind of had a tough day. McLaurin is in an auto-start wide receiver in season-long formats. He ranks 1st and 5th in air yards and target share, respectively. Still, this may not be a week to expect a big-time ceiling game, and it's inclined to fade the rest of these receivers in the offense that has racked up a league's 5th most targets to running backs position through 8 weeks. Logan Thomas has played at least 75% of the offensive snaps and racked up 4+ targets in every game this season. Production has taken a positive turn with Kyle Allen under center, as Thomas posted a 3 for 42 and a touchdown and a 4 for 60 and a touchdown receiving lines against the Giants and the Cowboys in weeks 8 and 7. He always a risk at finishing behind McLaurin and multiple running backs in a weekly target leader board, but this sort of full-time role deserves weekly upside tight into treatment. Moving forward, we're going to get into Baltimore and then Indianapolis. But first, we're going to take a break here, right? We're going to take a break and we're going to come back and finish out Matchup Mania and the podcast in general. So GSMC, we'll be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network is back, and we are about to finish out the podcast, continuing on matchup Mania. So, Baltimore Ravens at the Indianapolis Colts. So, we have a Miles Boykin, Marquise Brown, and Willie Snead, left, right, and slot, going up against Xavier Rhodes, Rock Ya-Sin, and Kenny Moore II. So, Hollywood Brown isn't really happy at the moment, and his since deleted tweet seemed to take issue with his 2-target workload in Week 8, but it's also to be reasonable that if the second-year talent was starting to get a bit fed up with some of the missed opportunities his passing game has experienced this season. So Brown leaves the Ravens in total targets, and his 684 air yards barely trails Tyler Lockett for the 15th highest mark in the league. This is enough for a fantasy-friendly workload to yield upside wide receiver 2 production when things are clicking, but that just hasn't been the case in 2020. The Colts secondary ranks favorably in most pass defense metrics, although the unit heavily benefited from an early season schedule consisting of matchups against Gardner Minshew, Sam Darnold, Nick Foles, Baker Mayfield, T. Higgins, with a 6-reception, 125 game. Marvin Hall with 4 receptions for 113. Allen Robinson for 7, 101 and 1. Marvin Jones with 3, 39 and 2. And even A.J. Green with 8, 96. Found ways to put up big numbers against this group. And I'm going back to the well with Hollywood as wide receiver 2 for another week. Neither Miles Boykin or Willie Snead is worth any fantasy consideration considering their inconsistent roles in this run-first offense. This is particularly true with Devin Duvernay playing a season-high 37 snaps in Week 8 as well. Mark Andrews hasn't surpassed 60 receiving yards in a game this season, but remains the team's featured pass game option in the red zone, and the matchup is absolutely brutal. Nobody has allowed fewer points to opposing tight ends in the Colts this season, and they have yet to allow a score from that position. Still, the stale state of tight ends make it tough to treat him as anything other than a top 3 option at the position. Just realize that there's a gap between himself and the likes of Travis Kelce or Darren Waller. And Michael Pittman Jr., T.Y. Hilton, and Zach Pascal are your left, right, and slot, while Jimmy Smith, Marcus Peters, and Khalil Dorsey are your cornerbacks in question. So T.Y. Hilton is banged up and he may not play. Zach Pascal with 6 targets last week was the only player with more than 5 pass game opportunities. Don't expect the Colts to test the Ravens secondary if they can help it. Despite the absence of Marlon Humphreys due to COVID, only Patrick Mahomes has thrown more than 225 yards with multiple touchdowns against the Ravens secondary since Week 1 of last season. Look elsewhere for viable wide receiver options this week. The Colts have a goal line wildcat package or tight end Trey Burton that angers people more than anything else in the NFL other than Ty Montgomery continuing to wear 88 despite spending an overwhelming majority of his career at running back. Anyway, Burton remains a threat to find the end zone because Coach Frank Reich apparently loves him, although his 51% snap rate in Week 8 trailed Jake Doyle's and barely edged Mo Alley Cox. Phil Rivers loves throwing to his tight ends, and the problem is that we have 3 to choose from, and this is a no-go in fantasy land as each is a touchdown-dependent low-end tight end 2 at best. None are recommended fantasy options in this tough spot. Detroit Lions at Minnesota, so Marvin Hall, Marvin Jones, and Danny Amendola against Cameron Dantzler, Chris Boyd, and Jeff Gladney. So, of course, Kenny Golladay is expected to miss multiple weeks of action. Jones has historically balled out on a per-game basis in this situation since the two joined forces in 2017. With Golladay in 38 games, he's had 6.2 targets, 3.8 receptions, 56.5 yards, and 0.6 touchdowns, and 12.9 PPR points. Without him in 7 games, 9 targets, 5 receptions, 72.1 yards, 15.6 PPR points. So Up next is the Vikings secondary that is mediocre when healthy and two currently all kinds of banged up. Treat Jones as a legit fantasy wide receiver 2 in Galladay's absence, particularly against a defense that has allowed more PPR points per game to that position than anyone except the Titans and Seahawks. And it's tough to expect from Hall or Amendola, with Quintez Cephas likely rejoining the fold. Focus on Jones and the offensive stud tight end in this mouthwatering spot. TJ Hawkinson is finally playing at least 70% of the offensive snaps more weeks than not, and at least 4 targets in every game this season. The overall PPR tight end 5 through 8 weeks treat Hawkinson as such against the Vikings defense that has allowed a league high 69.7 receiving yards per game to the tight end spot. So we have Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Chad Beebe in the left, right, and slot as Amani Aruwari, Jeffrey Okudah, and Justin Coleman are your corners. So Kirk Cousins threw just 14 passes in Week 8, and it's impossible to expect either of the offensive talented receivers to produce much with that sort of minuscule workload. A run-first approach again seems likely in Week 9, but at least the passing game is condensed enough to continue to go back to the well with both options. Thielen ranks 3rd in the league in target share and air yard share, and Jefferson ranks 17th in target share and 23rd in air yard share. The former receiver should continue to be locked in as a weekly wide receiver 1, while the latter is an upside wide receiver 2 against a league's 3rd worst defense in explosive pass play rate allowed. This is the 2 wide receiver passing game. None of the offense's other complementary wide receivers are realistic fantasy options. Irv Smith Jr. is a great talent, but has a true full-time role as this point. And however, Kyle Rudolph remains just as involved, rendering each as low-ceiling tight end 2 options. Each player would be recommended start if either is forced to miss time. It's just hard to expect any sort of weekly consistency from the likely number 4 or number 5 at best pass game option inside a run-first offense. Then we have Chicago Bears at the Tennessee Titans. So we have Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney, and Anthony Miller, who is banged up, keep in mind. So going up against Malcolm Butler, Jonathan Joseph, and Desmond King II. Allen Robinson is truly one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And the wide receiver 17 in PPR points per game had the lowest floor that he ever should due to the Bears' erratic play under center. But things should be a bit smoother than usual this week against the league's 2nd worst defense in fantasy production allowed to the position. Continue to fire up Robinson as a top 12 option at the position. Butler has been awful this year. Allen Robinson is just a special enough talent to win against just about anybody. Mooney finally hauled a deep ball target in Week 8, while Miller posted a season-high marks and snap rate and targets. Foles is yet to reach 275 yards in a game, and his only performance with more than 2 scores came away in Week 3 against the Falcons. So there's a limited ceiling for the entire passing game, so be careful with treating these complementary wide receivers as anything more than boom or bust wide receiver 4 types. And Jimmy Graham continues to lose a handful of snaps to Cole Kmet, but ultimately has at least 5 targets in 6 consecutive games. The longtime veteran tight end ranks 6th in targets at the position and 14th in PPR points per game. High-end volume hasn't been enough to produce consistent production. Continue to treat Graham as a tight end-dependent tight end 2, and he is 17th ranked at the position this week. For the Titans offense, A.J. Brown, Corey Davis, and Khalif Raymond at the slot, Jalen Johnson, Kyle Fuller, and Buster Screen at the cornerback. So A.J. Brown has 36 targets, 27 receptions, 354 yards, 5 touchdowns, and averages 18.5 PPR points per game when both Corey Davis and him have played this season. And Corey Davis averages is seeing 38 targets, 29 receptions, 369 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, and 16.8 points per game. Overall, Brown is wide receiver 7 in PPR points, and Davis is 16. Ryan Tannehill has truly functioned as one of the league's best quarterbacks over the past 13 months. throw in the reality that the Titans' pass game volume is higher than last year thanks to the offense generally working at a faster pace, it makes sense that the artist known as Tana Thrill can support multiple fantasy-relevant wide receivers. There's always AJB wide receiver 1 season, but Davis has earned a weekly borderline wide receiver 2 appeal. You just don't love his chances in the spot against one of the 4 defenses that allow fewer than 30 PPR points per game to that position. And just don't count out Davis as a usable fantasy asset purely because he doesn't consistently meet expectations during the 2017 through 2019 seasons. Jonnu Smith has been a disappointment in 3 consecutive weeks. And, the gifted tight end may not be operating at 100% after sustaining an ankle injury in week 6. Still, a bounce-back performance could be on the horizon considering that he ran 22 routes in week 8, his highest mark since week 3. Control your breathing. Try not to panic and fire up the Smith as a top 10 option at the position against the Bears defense that didn't exactly shut down Evan Ingram, Jared Cook, Cam Brate, TJ Hawkinson, or Rob Gronkowski in the past. So at the Carolina at the Kansas City Chiefs, we have DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel against Rashad Breeland, Charvarius Ward, and Tyrann Mathieu. So Teddy Two Gloves has struggled to put up big game numbers in recent weeks, failing to surpass even 225 yards through the air against the Bears and Falcons alike. Hopefully volume is less of an issue this week due to the potential the Panthers are forced to pass the ball early and often a matchup that is expected to feature plenty of negative game script. Bridgewater hasn't reached over 30 pass attempts in a game since week 5, but this should be the floor for him in this spot. Moore's disappointing usage before late in the fourth quarter last week wasn't ideal, but don't count on it becoming a long-term problem. Both Moore and Anderson have received anyone's idea of top 20 workloads through 8 weeks. Don't expect Christian McCaffrey to see anything other than his usual workhorse role once active. The Panthers have 64 million reasons why they should continue to feed McCaffrey all the snaps he can handle, and let's just hope that they continue to build the passing game around Anderson and Moore instead of their stud running back. Obviously, getting McCaffrey the ball is good for scoring points business, but in the manner in which they relentlessly fed targets in 2019 was a bit much. Both the 2019 and the 2020 editions of the Panthers offense have heavily featured the position in the passing game. However, Kyle Allen targeted the back as his first read on an asinine 54% of his targets to the position. Bridgewater has a much more reasonable 36% rate through 8 weeks. The Chiefs have struggled to contain notable number 1 wide receivers such as Henry Ruggs, Will Fuller, Keenan Allen, and Stephon Diggs. Continue to fire up both Anderson and Moore's top 20 fantasy plays, largely regardless of the matchup. Ian Thomas snaps have gone up in 4 consecutive games. However, he already pint-sized target share could be further lowered with Christian McCaffrey expected to be back in action this week, and Thomas has scored just once all season and doesn't have more than 30 yards in a game, so that's probably a pass. Now we have Demarcus Robinson, Mecole Hardman, and Tyreek Hill, and Deontay Jackson, Rasul Douglas, and Jeremy Chin as your cornerbacks. So the national media largely chastised the Bills' defensive approach against the Chiefs in Week 6 when they sold out to stop the pass and accordingly allowed gaping holes to Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the run game. The strategy ultimately didn't work. The Chiefs defeated the Bills 26-17. Still, Mahomes attempted a season-low 26 pass attempts, and just 8% of his throws were against a box, at least 7 defenders in it. The Chiefs are a smart team. They run the ball against soft boxes and throw the ball when the defenses load up in the box. Last week, the Jets sold out to stop the run because, 45% of Mahomes' pass attempts wound up being against loaded boxes with 7 or more defenders. And the Chiefs' first-team offense accordingly threw the ball 42 times in just over 3 quarters of work. Neither strategy led to victory, but it makes sense to try and limit the number of times Mahomes has the ball in his hands. Carolina's opponents have only faced a box featuring 7 or more defenders on 32% of dropbacks, the 5th lowest mark in the league. Expect the Chiefs to get Edwards and Le'Veon Bell a bit more consistently involved in the ground this week. Obviously Tyreek Hill remains an upside wide receiver 1 regardless of matchup. Overall, though, Tyler Lockett, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, and DeAndre Hopkins have more points in PPR on the season than Mahomes' undisputed number one wide receiver. And you're less optimistic about expecting some sort of high-end production from any other wide receivers involved in the get-go. So, Travis Kelce caught 97 of 138 targets last in 5 scores in 2019. And this season he's on pace for 96, 136, and 12 scores. Positive touchdown regression is a hell of a drug. Kelce will continue to be ranked as the position's top dog for the remainder of 2020, barring all injury concerns. So, those are some interesting matchups for sure, as we're going to go ahead and close out the podcast, man. Thank you all for checking in and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review the podcast whenever you listen, and stay safe out there, man. GSMC, don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook and Twitter at GSMC Fantasy Football. I'll see you all on Tuesday to see what all happened over the weekend. GSMC will be back later on, man. Peace out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.